So let's talk a little bit about Cain. We're just going to kind of do cleanup today on a couple of things that we haven't yet talked about with missions, and so no real kind of overarching theme. But Cain, we've been kind of dialoguing on his chapters. Again, a lot of good ones. Again, I already mentioned, maybe the one on miracles he could have left out. But on chapter 16, the opposition of Satan. Any thoughts or particularly profound comments that you saw there that would be good that none of us missed and all of us think about?
What page is that?
267 starts on.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think it's interesting in 269 where it says, "Let us make no mistake about it. Satan is mankind's enemy number one."
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and then I liked his thing, the General MacArthur's
Analogy.
how people said MacArthur's returning and like liberation. So yeah, it's fascinating. Satan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he has a lot of control over
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
our world.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Anything else from that chapter?
I noted on 274, the second to the last paragraph, kind of the middle of it. The missionaries' ultimate quarrel is not with humanism, nationalism, communism, or any other earthly system, but with Satan himself.
Yeah.
Who was, I'm sure, of course, behind all those others. But
Right. Yeah. 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 I liked that comment. That comment also. And it's. I guess it was in the men's Bible study this morning. We were from a different perspective, looking at that from this statement of Christ at the declaration of Peter, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell," meant to be Satan, not euphemistic, but symbolic of Satan, metaphorical of Satan, and all that he wrangles in, all these isms. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh.
About halfway down, mental depression is another favorite method of attack.
Yeah.
Discouragement is the most lethal weapon in the devil's arsenal. So how much of that is, how much of that do missionaries have to deal with? I know we've been listening to Spurgeon.
Yeah.
Spurgeon at the end, there's a little biography of him, and it talks about him having depression regularly.
Yeah, serious depression. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for missionaries, that would be really hard.
I didn't know that Fraser also did, J.O. Fraser. I don't know much about him, but I've seen some of his, I think a biography on him I've thought about reading one time.
I find he knows a lot about these different different missionary names. I want to look up. There's some ladies that I aren't ones that I really know of, and it'd be interesting if they have biographies on them, because they seem like those kind of ladies could be as amazing as Gladys or Amy Carmichael, but they're not talked about.
Yeah. And I would be willing to bet that you could find a lot of biographies. I know, matter of fact, I think didn't at the Lilly Symposium they gave out a biography of, was it a biography of Lillian? It's Trotter, right? Lillian Trotter, is that her name?
Or I think or talked about her. I think
talked about her. It wasn't a biography. Mm-hmm. So, but next chapter is the wrath of man.
I thought this was really
This
timely.
is yeah.
On number 2, racial prejudice.
Yeah.
And
Wasn't that
says,
funny to read that from?
Yes, regarded as the sin of the white race. This was in 76.
Yeah.
Now with the 1619 project and
What's this? I don't know.
critical race.
Yeah.
1619 project is a New York Times project that says the beginning of America didn't happen in 17. What is it?
It was 1619
It
when
happened
the
in
first
1699.
slaves came over to America.
Uh-huh.
And the Revolutionary War was to protect America from or having slaves.
Oh, because
Everything is viewed in slaves.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
that's a critical race theory in which white people are the problem. And they're trying to do this with the national education and the American teachers. So I thought this was really weird.
It was. I thought that same thing too. It's like, it's not much new, under the sun. But, religious fanaticism, he talked about also. Other things in the wrath of man. Good list, national chauvinism, economic interests, all of those things kind of used to impede the work of the gospel. It's interesting, was it Cain? I think maybe it was Cain that wrote something that we often forget about is that, we are to pray for peace so that the gospel can go forth. And a lot of times, I think maybe Cain, I can't remember what I read this last couple weeks on that, but it's like, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, it's clearly, but and I'm sure it was Cain, wasn't it him who said, who said, the fact of the matter is, that's true somewhat, but it also causes great harm. And we saw that in Poland, that when we went there, the church was very weak because of political, kind of and spiritual oppression.
Actually, one of the reasons why the gospel was able to spread so quickly is because of the Roman Empire.
They didn't have any issues with Christians.
And they ruled everywhere, and there was relative peace everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So they fed them to the lions.
And everything changed. Yeah. It was good. Conflict and teachings of Christ regarding the wrath of man. Conflict in the Christian mission is inevitable. That was just a really good section. Matter of fact, the number 2, all of these. Conflict will involve the disciples in personal danger, perhaps death. Danger, even death, is no reason to halt the missionary enterprise. Whatever the danger, count on Christ's presence. As a matter of fact, I had a discussion with someone just recently, a missions executive, just recently about the fact that so much of our missions now is going under the guise of you have to have a platform to get into closed countries. You got to do something to get in there, and you got to be bivocational and have a platform, and sometimes that works well. I've seen missionaries in closed countries who are there more for their platform than they are for the mission, and it's just like, okay, it's obviously, and that's not a matter of fact. And some of the ones I talked to said that it's about a 50-50. It's not a rare thing to have them more interested in the platform than the mission, and it was just like, I know we can't legally go into closed countries, but why don't we go into them illegally? Why are we unwilling to take the risks to go in and share the gospel? Well, because and again, it's
But how would you go in illegally?
you just
Because they won't give you a visa.
you just cross the borders and have and you live on one side and cross over on the other and stay under the radar. And I mean, it's not that all of Christianity, all of mission work needs to be done, but we're not even considering those things anymore. We used to consider them more. Danger used to nobody wants to live in a dangerous place, but danger now I think has become this and I think COVID was a good example of that. If there's danger involved, you shouldn't be doing it. And it's like, now wait a minute, there are some things, God being one of them, that is more important than danger. And we've lost that in missions, I think, and we've lost it in the Christian church. At least much of what we know of as the Christian church. In some parts of the world, they still live with a daily understanding that to be a Christian is a dangerous thing. It's just what it means. And again, we don't have to invite it, but it seems to me we flee from it. And I think that's just as unprofitable, or worse. I don't know. But anybody, any thoughts on that? I appreciate the fact that he brought all that up. Role of the church, which I thought was a strange title for the content of it, but and you probably have noticed that every so often, a concept that was also germane to an earlier chapter is germane to a later one, and he'll kind of repeat the concept, which I think is fair. Does a little bit of that, but
I did have a question, and I probably have not read the Bible enough. God said David was a man after his own heart. What did David do that reflected that it was like God's heart?
Yeah, it's an interesting statement because it never tells us, at least I can't think of where it ever says, why that statement is made.
But they always say it.
Yeah. Seems my impression from why David was talked about that way, why Saul was not, it seems to me that it was tied to the humility of David, that David wasn't high on himself.
But then David, did he do the Bathsheba thing?
Yeah.
Okay, he sinned, so God does not sin.
No.
So, yeah, where's the...
Well, we just determined that David is not God.
But God himself said of David, didn't he, that he was a man after his own heart.
Yeah.
So those were God's
it's a true statement. God knew that, even knew of his. The simple solution is that we all sin, and God's not okay with any of it. But there are some who pursue Him more wholeheartedly than others, in spite of their sin, and God honors that. That's a good thing.
And David wrote a book or something, right? Proverbs. Or
a lot of the Psalms
the songs
were written by David. But anybody know any other ideas why he got that accolade from God, a man after his own heart? And I don't know that I've always kind of tied it to his humility, but don't know that that's. I know it's not stated, but.
Yeah,
I don't know that he was all that humble. And I was reading in the I think our Bible reading today or something. He had all these concubines, and he pursued sex and
Well, you've got to be a little bit careful not to read back into, the culture things of today. There was a God allowed, the concubines. He allowed, the multiple wives. Some of the most godliest women and even men we know came from polygamous places. Hannah is a good example. Jacob, had 4 wives. So somehow at that time God, it was not a mark of spiritual depravity. And for a king, it was kind of a typical mark of protection of the throne. You needed enough heirs that if somebody knocks off your heirs, you've still got somebody. In a monarchy, it's kind of a point of what do you call that when you of dynasty, of security of the dynasty. Matter of fact, you even read of some of the kings. So and so had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. You know, one of the judges, and it's meant to be not a criticism of his home life, but a sign of his strength that he had. Not that his home life was impeccable, but so you know, it's. I mean, we're not out having concubines, and this, you know, we're not in that, but that probably wasn't his big sin. You know, Bathsheba was clearly, you know, and the Lord judged him for that. But goes out and married Abigail, and he already had a couple other wives before that, and it was through Abigail that Solomon comes, right? Abigail was through Solomon, you know.
Bathsheba.
Oh, Bathsheba. That was Bathsheba, right? Yeah, because he married Bathsheba after he killed Uriah. Yeah, I forgot about that. So so there's things, and I say humility, and you said you weren't sure if it was humility, and I think you're right, because David, you know, I think what it was David's low or humility in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I would take kind of balanced with that, different than any of the other kings when they brought the ark. And
Yeah.
It was just shamelessly,
Yeah.
just exuberant in his joy over that.
Yeah.
I took that as unique to David over,
Yeah.
over other kings.
And even at the chiding of Michal, and he said, isn't it Michal? Wasn't that Saul's daughter?
We never knew how to pronounce that.
Oh,
Do you think that's it?
that's how I've always
Okay,
pronounced
okay,
it,
no,
Michal.
thank you.
But the chiding of her, and he says, I don't mind if people look down on me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why I guess in life he was very okay with chopping off people's heads, but when Shimei rebuked him, when
I'm thinking about just the way his response to Saul.
yeah, a couple times he could have killed him. He said, I won't
No.
touch the Lord's anointed.
And that's definitely really
Yeah.
after God's.
And he was a bloody man. David was fine with killing people.
Yeah.
You know, he killed lots of people. Matter of fact, one of the things that seems to be implied when the Lord doesn't let him build the temple is that there's too much blood on his hands. And there was a lot of blood on his hands. But he wouldn't kill the Lord's anointed. It wasn't that he had great love for Saul, but you know, it was just.
What is your take on the guy that when the altar was being brought back?
Uzzah.
Yeah, and he just when intended to catch or balance it, and God struck him dead.
Yep.
So
And like, what is that?
So when I was, can I?
Please.
So, and I know this is way off topic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but we're
too.
having a lot of fun with
So-
it. It's kind of, it's
I really love that story because that story, if we take it and translate it into modern standards, they literally took the ark, tossed it in the back of that rusty white pickup back there, and went hauling off, not carrying a whoop.
Oh, that's
Right?
that's the backstory.
That's if you want to look at it today,
Yeah.
if it happened today, that's how it would happen today.
Okay,
And-
I get it now.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
If a white rusty pickup makes it work, I'm good with that. And I mean in the sense of explanation. I didn't mean hauling the ark.
No.
Yeah,
no,
and they'll make
that's
that.
exactly how they.
And David will make that exact statement. We read about it today, or was it today or yesterday? No, today we read about it, that David makes the exact statement. He then later goes to the priest and said, you know, last time God got really mad, and so this time I want you.
I took that, just to throw it out, it's interesting, is that's how the Philistines brought it in the ark. They brought it in a cart.
Well, I think you're referring to Uzzah's demeanor was lackadaisical.
right.
Super like.
And then David was all scared, so he left it at some other little place And then when he saw that that place as being blessed and stuff, oh, now I'm ready to take it back.
You know, it could have been that Uzzah was lackadaisical. Very easy to believe that. It's also possible that Uzzah was not evil of heart when he did it.
His love and care.
Could have been, but it was still wrong. It was still treating God without the holiness he deserves, and there's a message there, even if it's like, you know what, God is holy, and he must be treated that way.
And a rule or something, you need to obey it.
Yeah, you know, and so I don't know what it was. It doesn't tell us. It does tell us that David was mad at God for striking Uzzah, and when later they were very careful every 6 steps to sacrifice an oxen, and that was when he was doing all the dancing, and so yeah. But in the role of the church, back to Cain, at least for a moment, in the role of the church, one of the big things he brings out, and earlier you remember Cain, as he talked about theology, he talked very much about the election of God, the sovereign work of God. But in this chapter, you know, he kind of contrasted it to the idea of miracles, that God does something and man does something, that man has a responsibility. Matter of fact, there was some really good...
I loved it where he says divine-human cooperation.
Yeah, and he...
And...
a couple of them. I thought he just had some really good... let me see. One of the things the first one I marked was on page 298, I guess. I want to make sure I'm not passing over anything.
Well, I have one on 295.
Let's do that then first.
Anna has a
295.
I'll do after mine.
Not the start of the last paragraph, but the one that starts but before he left. So at the end of that, his part, God's was to provide the gospel. Theirs was to proclaim it.
Yeah.
He could not provide it.
He could
would
not
proclaim it.
Yeah, that was a really good statement, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's still true today. The only exception to that, again, is when we get to the book of Revelation, and there's one statement where an eagle from the heavens will be flying over the earth. It says, proclaiming the gospel. And so but that was a great statement. What was the other one?
I was curious on 294. I had never heard it said that the first 3 hours on the cross Jesus suffering were physical.
Yeah. Me neither.
Is that like? Do you have thoughts on that? I've never.
Well, I think whether you can divide it. I suspect the last 3 hours there was also a good deal of physical suffering also, but there is. It does. They're clearly of the two. When of Christ's crucifixion, the physical sufferings were clearly the minimalistic part of what he did. It was the most gruesome way to die, without a doubt. But the most gruesome way to die was still, a day on the beach, compared to the spiritual sufferings for the sins of mankind that he did on the cross. So it was couched in the worst graphic description of physical torture that could ever be imagined, but even that wasn't anything compared to the spiritual torture. It was just the worst way it could be couched. And it is fair to state, and I would agree with it, that the primary point of God bearing down on him the sins of mankind for eternity, the punishment that they would have to pay, was the 3 hours of darkness when God shut out the lights and poured down on his son, this wrath, unbelievable, that would even cause Jesus to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some people would say that, well, he was obviously wrong. God wouldn't forsake him. Here he was, the perfect Son of God, doing the perfect will of God. in this great suffering, God wouldn't forsake him for that, but he did. He wasn't wrong. He was forsaken of God. He literally became our sin bearer, and God forsake him as he would forsake us. And so, in that sense, whether you can divide those two epochs or not, first 3 hours, second 3 hours, there clearly is a division between the physical sufferings and the spiritual sufferings, and the spiritual, we're just far and above.
I was talking with Joe Terrell, because I was asking him, well, did Jesus actually go to hell? And he sent me some clips and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, the one I really agreed with, is R.C. Sproul saying Jesus had the ultimate sacrifice or whatever, and that period, because he said the thief would join him in paradise that day.
Yeah.
So R.C. Sproul said the hell was those 3 hours of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was saying, and I thought that really makes sense to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't really thought of it in that particular term, but R.C. is pretty sharp on those things, and so, or was pretty sharp. He's sharper now, even.
Yeah, I guess so now.
And I don't want to diminish the physical agony that Christ went through on the cross. It was the separation from God, the pouring out of God's wrath on Christ. That's the pure. But the worst part of the cross is not the physical, I don't think. It's that he was crucified like any other common criminal. God of the universe was put on just a cross like any other criminal that had to be sacrificed by the cruel Roman Empire. Like,
why would you say that's the worst part of it?
well, I don't know if it's the worst. It's definitely a terrible part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just, I mean, the Romans could have figured out even more graphic ways to torture and kill him. We've seen even worse examples in humanity. No,
but that was the worst that the Romans had.
Yeah.
That was their torture. That was.
But that wasn't anything exclusive for Christ. It was the fact
Right.
that
A lot of criminals were.
But they researched this, the Romans. If you burned somebody or dipped them in oil, they died too fast. So this was the most painful
And
way.
I hear that. But what I'm saying is, the humility is that they took God of the universe and treated him like a...
Philippians talks about he humbled himself even to the point of death on the cross.
yeah.
So clearly is a factor.
And they always have a loincloth. He was nude. That's how they did it back then. So
on page 298, a couple of other statements I think are interesting. He talks about top of page 298. The glorious fact of the gospel is whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. But Paul asks, how are men to call upon him who have not believed? How are they to believe in whom they have not heard? How shall they hear without a preacher? And that is logic, not rhetoric. And the logic is devastating. The point meaning, logic, that is true. You can backstep this. If you do not go, they will not hear. That's not just a rhetoric, motivational cry. It is true. Kind of emphasizing this aspect of the human nature. Middle of page 299, right after it says Psalm 145:17. It would not be correct to say that Almighty God cannot impinge his saving truth directly in the minds of men with sufficient force to bring them to himself. But we have no reason from the scriptures to believe or even to assume that he ever does so. And we're not saying God can't. He can do what he wants. but there's nothing in scriptures to give us the idea that that's what he would do. So I thought he had some really good human responsibility statements in that. Anybody else have anything that they...
On that same page you're on, 299, I thought the paragraph right under the one you're talking about
Yeah.
starts with some people have taken comfort from the hope
Yeah,
that if one
yeah.
person falls down his missionary obligation, God will raise up someone else takes place. This, the middle of it, I thought was very interesting. His wording, how he did it. Nowhere does the New Testament suggest that God has his backup team to step into the gap when the original team fails to follow through.
Yeah.
I thought that was so clever and so
He
well
just-
worded, because it's like some people can say, "Oh yeah, well God will do this or whatever," but it says nowhere does it say God has a backup
Yeah.
team to step in.
He really did do a good job with that chapter, didn't he? To keep the tension of the responsibility that God has put upon us, and and he's not an Arminian. I mean, if it was an Arminian, you say, he doesn't understand the sovereignty of God. That's why he's off the hook. But he's not an Arminian. He's a Calvinist. You know, he clearly, he's a Calvinist in the sense of soteriology. I don't know if he is with eschatology. I don't know what his, but with soteriology, he clearly is. He talked about it in the early chapters, but not the type of. But again, just keeping that tension very, very strong there. So, Place of Miracles. Okay, number 20. I don't know. Didn't do anything for me. But because in this was confession time, I really didn't think it was a good chapter, but I did ask myself how much of it was my own problem. It's hard to write 18 good chapters, more or less, and then really just lay an egg. I think he laid an egg, but maybe that has more to do with my holes than his. So, because I couldn't have written those previous 18, good chapters. So, but anybody want to make any comments on chapter 19? Anybody else have any kind of, Terry, you said you kind of wrestled with it a little bit.
Well, I remember reading when we used to read K.P. Johann's Gospel for Asia, his newsletters from India.
Yeah, I never heard of him.
That's a good thing.
And they would regularly have stories in there of miracles.
Yeah.
That in India that were bringing people to the Lord, but then since he's been caught for other things with his money and all, then one wouldn't even know the stories.
Oh yeah,
So,
that's too bad.
But I had that questioning, that wonderment: is it possible that in some places that maybe God is using miracles?
Yeah. One area where I thought that he was a little bit inconsistent, and this is just how I was rationalizing in ways that, because miracles are, because then he would talk about, how do we get people out there? Well, we pray. That's how we get people out there. Well, that's the miraculous working of God. When God works from heaven, and intervenes in the affairs of men to accomplish His will, we call that a miracle. However He intervenes, He doesn't leave men to their own. And he talked clearly about the idea of understanding the gospel is a miraculous work of God. So I don't know in denying the supernatural aspect that I feel like I'm denying the miraculous work of God in the missionary mandate, that the power of God is still there emphatically. I just don't know that I see the authenticating signs and wonders, and I have never seen them either here or in the mission field. Never seen anybody perform them. I think I've seen lots of things I would say were a miracle of God, that God intervened, but different than you need to be, may you be blind and you be blind, or may you be raised from the dead, and I haven't seen those type of things. So
I think God does put in place things that I'm thinking about medical things where there's no medical
Yeah.
explanation,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, for it. And, you know, I believe that God intervened, well,
Yeah.
on my stroke, because they were just gonna put me on the top floor to become a vegetable.
Yeah. Mhm.
And he set in motion
Yeah.
all these other things, and that brought me back to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I mean I was challenged by his, you don't expect it, you won't see it. You know, we're not engaging the power of God was kind of his critique, because we're not asking for God to do miracles. And again, I thought he was a little bit inconsistent there, because, well, we're asking for God to open up hearts, we're asking for God to send workers. So we are trying to engage the power of God. But I was challenged, you know, by that, and make me realize, I mean, and I think I've always realized, I suspect all of us, none of us are, at least I don't think any of us are against miracles, you know, if God wanted to do one. We're just skeptical because of the things, even like what Terry was saying. So many miracles seem to be, you know, facades and fakes, and really, if you look at the apostles, Jesus did a lot. He did a boatload. He sometimes says he healed everybody who came to him. But the apostles really only did a couple, you know. And he did claim that a lot of the early church writings spoke often of them, and I can't vouch for the validity of that or not. I haven't, you know, that whole double road line of books with the red and the green and the whole row behind it, those are the writings of the early church fathers. Maybe in my retirement I'll read through them, but it was one of those that I was meant to bring out the other night to read about this historian I mentioned with UCBS. But so a lot of stuff there. Any other thoughts on miracles before we go on? Last one was on prayer.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, they did a good job there again. Yeah, he got back on track when he got to chapter 20. You know.
It was very convicting.
Yeah, he did do a good job in that, and made me think. I was even, you know, and he talked about, well, again, back in 1966, that, you know, most churches were even back then not getting together to pray, and those that did, you know, just had the faithful few. And I thought, well, that kind of sounds like us, you know, just kind of the faithful few. But it did make me, you know, even think through, you know. Because there was a time when prayer meetings were missions focused, and wondering if, you know, I don't know, maybe it's something we need to do. Maybe, you know, once or twice of our 1 or 2 times a month is just focused on missions. Maybe once just on evangelism, once on other things. You know, there are other things we're called to do, but.
I would love to see one or multiple just on unsaved
Yeah,
that are
just
spouses in the church.
just focus on that, and it was kind of something I walked away from that chapter, that you know, we're to pray about all things, but I suspect when we get together as a body, we're to pray about the most important things.
On page 323.
So don't let me forget that, Steve. If I don't make some adjustments over the course of time,
Well, I
remind
have
me.
another one to add to that, too.
Okay, well, let her go first, then you get the next.
All right, so the title, Prayer, the Perennial Source of Power, in that first paragraph under there, it's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But even they don't seem to have any great burden for the evangelism of the world. That's those prayer
Yeah.
meetings that we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Mhm.
The prayers offered at such meetings usually revolve around the physical and material
Yeah.
needs of the local
Yeah.
congregation.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like in our time
Yeah.
at the prayer meetings, you
Yeah.
know, that we can take as much time writing down or asking each other what
Yeah.
personal prayer requests we have, and then we don't have that much time left to actually pray, and
Yeah.
when we do pray, we seldom get to that, what's in the middle, and the missionaries are some of what's in there, the elders, the ministries of the church, but these new little ones that take a long time.
Yeah.
We have a way that we could do that without being offensive. And we'd love to do it.
Yeah. I've tried over the years to make some modifications. One of which, we don't stay as a group and take prayer requests as a group, because then we'd never. If something's really important, bring it up. Otherwise, one of the things that I think is a good part of the prayer meeting is when people come. Sometimes people come because they need prayer, they want prayer, and I think, and so that serves that purpose, but it's eclipsed the other things, and so somehow, and I think.
I'm guessing most of us that come are trying to pray in other areas, and maybe those who are coming in occasionally.
Yeah, I think that's more
that could be recognized.
the occasional person. I think pretty much, but.
What is
intercessory?
Yes.
To intercede for someone, to go in their place, to go talk to God for them on their behalf. So you pray for somebody else. You pray for somebody else's.
Right. And I hate to use the C word, but
then you shouldn't. You don't use any words you hate to use.
Okay.
Pretend I'm.
All right. I'm just gonna say when people pray for the poor, for the destitute, and all this stuff, and the congregation says, "Christ have mercy," and is that intercessory prayer?
Intercessory prayer would be praying for somebody else. Yes, that would be classically intercessory. So, what were you going to say, Steve?
Well, I would, we're almost getting past. I would love to see, this is all along the missions point, but if we think about it, we had the Lord, the Ascension, and then 40 days to Pentecost, and
40.
40 to the Ascension.
Yeah.
Yeah, 40 to the Ascension, but then 10 more days.
Yeah, that's right.
I would love to see a focus, because, in other words, just the mindset of, wait a minute, so this was the going out. There was that 10 days, and that focus of the going out, so do we own that? Own that command personally. So missions is one thing, but right then, at Pentecost, this was then the beginning of go out you.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that 10 days between the Ascension and the Pentecost, they were musing on that, for lack of a better term, to own it.
Yeah, and so we had, so there was Easter, but to me that's so critical in a mindset. First there's this horrible, doubt, this fear, but now, okay, we have the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what is it, roughly the 26th or so of May, and we're coming to that point, that awareness, but we're to own this, the going out, the sharing, it's just that.
Yeah. And a lot of good thoughts in areas that we as a church need to do better in both encouraging and equipping and modeling and doing all of the
and that's
those things.
Said in a critical way.
No. It is.
I love that awareness.
Yeah.
We're in the time right now of call it even doubt and fear, but then the Spirit comes, and with that is the enabling.
Yeah, the empowering, and he talked a lot about that in his chapter on the Spirit. The doing the things in the Spirit, the power that's there. Yeah.
The missions is good, but it begins with us personally, you know, that ownership.
By the way, on page 322, I really like this paragraph, like third down, on we generally think of William Carey as the father of modern missions. Everyone knows of his monumental work in India, but few know about his invalid sister at home.
Yeah.
Who stood behind him in daily intercession for many years.
Yeah.
And then how Hudson Taylor also had a sister and a mother who were
Yeah.
warriors.
Yeah.
So I thought that was neat to show the power of prayer for people that are home.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. Yeah. That I didn't know about either one of those backstories either.
So why do you think people don't come to the prayer meeting here on Thursday?
Why do I think they don't come?
Why?
I think there's just a vast variety of reasons. One, I think there is the spiritual battle of it is a battle to pray, because I think Satan makes it a battle. So I think that's there. I think people are way too busy. They have too much going on. They've got their days jam-packed, and they got to figure out, okay, they need me at Awana. I need to be there on Wednesday night or something else, and I've just got other things I need to do. Their schedules are too big, sports or whatever else. I think some of it's habit. I think a lot of people desire to go and like it when they go, but it's hard to keep going. Most, and I know it's taken a long time, even for myself, to build the habit to where, I go because I enjoy it. I want to be there, and enjoying is the wrong word. I want to be there. It's not because I'm the pastor and I have to be there. So I think there's just lots of reasons. Lack of faith. I don't know. I just think it's just got. Do you have any ideas on?
No, I mean, because we're new here, so we're just trying to learn. But we remember when we first came here and in the parking lot, and there was a time when you really pleaded with people to be at that Thursday night.
Yeah.
And then just coming back in, we had never been. So we thought when we came into that prayer meeting, it was going to be packed out.
Yeah.
And we were shocked at how few people there were. And then that's been so. We've just kind of.
Yeah.
As a family.
And sometimes it morphs up, and sometimes it morphs down. When I first came here, there would probably be a regular groups of 40. It was a little bit different. It was a little less praying, more Bible study-ish.
And it's easier to sit and listen.
Yeah, it's easier to sit and listen. And part of the busyness problem I brought into the church. We got Awana on this night, we got Tyrannus on that night, we got this going on, and it took me a while to realize that people can only do so much. And so Dan, you've been to prayer meeting, but you're not a regular feature there. Why would you say?
So I was a regular feature there for probably about 1 year.
Yeah. And what changed?
I'm busy.
Yeah.
And I'm tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do
That's.
you have kids
And I'm not. And
stuff?
no, my children are grown.
Oh.
And I'm not busy with I'm not a sports guy.
No.
And I don't have hobbies.
Yeah.
All I do is work, spend time with Amanda, and church. That's all I do.
Yeah. So.
I mean,
could we, when you hear the hearts of people,
and
I
actually,
really,
I didn't finish answering.
Oh.
And to be frank, I'm antsy. To sit and devote an hour to not open-ended prayer, that's hard. That's hard for me.
Is it?
It's really hard.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, but there's something to say when people hear about passion and an encouragement that, because there's a lot of people that are involved in Awana.
Yeah.
However, to understand a plea of importance of you may not feel called in that way, but certainly for you to come and pray for
Yeah.
Juana, pray for some of these others, or
Right.
or what.
Mi-
Frequently hearing just those sorts of things, and if you're listen, so we know some that are a little nervous about praying publicly. So come and then in the group, you pray quietly. You pray to yourself. You don't have to pray out. You know.
Well, when I came, you don't have any kids, and if you've got soccer or things to watch with your kids or grandkids in the evenings, or college or any of that stuff, and you can't I don't think you can drag kids to.
Oh, yeah, you can.
That will set.
We always brought our kids to prayer meeting.
Nathan brings
his, and one of them is a year and a half old. How old is?
She's almost 2 now.
Yeah.
Miss Debbie comes.
And listen, they're just and it's not this.
Bree and Joe bring their kids at times. Yeah. You can bring them and.
And all these kids who are encouraging mom and dad, we don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
Don't stay home.
Yeah. Matter of fact, if we could get the kids into it, we'd probably get more parents. So, but good discussion, and not at all a waste of time. It is probably one of those things that we have to keep the pressure on to, to keep reminding people, because it's hard work. And prayer is one of those disciplines that I believe that God never allows us to feel like we do enough. It's just one of this. It's this bottomless, and that's okay. It's okay to feel that way.
I just want to make a comment because it talks about in the 3 reasons it's possible, proper, and profitable. But then I was reminded that Jesus, the great example, he prayed every time he made a decision. And I needed to be reminded of that. I mean, if Jesus prayed, that's who we're supposed to be following.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that really good to hear.
Now, the comment on that, because Terry and I we talked about this, how, I mean, being God, he virtually could have instantaneously communicated with the Father, everything, as opposed to spending all night in prayer.
Yeah.
And so,
But he
other
showed
than
us.
an example to us, what else would he spend?
I would say it's even more than it's not just an example to us. It is a real necessity for the humanity of Jesus.
Yes, because he was.
He was fully man.
Yeah, fully man at that time,
and in the context of his humanity, he had no special routes to the Father. And in the context of his deity, he was one with the Father.
Yeah.
And that's where we just, but the Scripture asserts to us things about the humanity, at times things that relate to his humanity, at times things that relate to his deity. And I think we should understand that in his humanity, just like us in our humanity, spending the night in prayer, it was more than just a show, it was a necessity. That was the only way in his humanity to accomplish those things that he accomplished. So that's how I would. Which is still a great example. I think it's even a stronger example. I think than so it's not like it's not an example, but it is he. If it was necessary for him in a perfect humanity, how much more so us in an imperfect one. So let's talk a little bit about missions. A little bit of time we have, and just a couple things on, missions like prayer. obviously, as believers who are indwelt by the Spirit of God, God warms our hearts towards spiritual things, prayer, missions, study of His Word. Okay, that is an act of God. Believers will hunger and thirst for the things of God. Okay, so in that sense, we need nothing else. But in a very real sense, as bodies of Christ, God calls upon those that are mature to help those who are maturing to understand, the things of God as they should be understood. Paul to Timothy, pass these things on to faithful men who will pass them on to others, that there's this continual passing on of truth. And in that context, that yes, all believers should have this heartbeat naturally, whether it be prayer or missions. There is a place for the mature believers to grow the maturing in a heart for these things. Okay, that's my only premise. Everybody got the premise that there is a place for us to work, kind of like Cain's chapter on, we have a responsibility here to be more missions, to be better at the mission of the church. We could change that for prayer. We have a responsibility to be better at prayer. So knowing that the body of Christ needs to be continually built up, because it's continually changing. Some are dying, some are getting saved. The ones that died kind of got a good grasp of all these things. When are getting saved, they're like, okay, what are we supposed to be doing? They have to be brought up. Knowing that the body of Christ is continually changing and needs to be continually, each generation, for lack of a better term, brought up into these important truths of, in our context, is missions. What are the ways that you continue to grow believers in an understanding and a conviction for missions? If you stop working at it, it will go away. So what are the ways that you would envision, or that you could think that you would need to keep working at it? What do you do? Communication is always important. How? Communicate what?
What people are doing. That's why the letters and the hearing from what they're doing and their needs. Not so much. The spiritual and emotional needs a lot. This is to understand the struggles that they're and it really conveys. When you different letters, you can tell just the different hearts. What's going on.
Okay, communicate. Maybe along the adage of, out of sight, out of mind. If we're not keeping it in front of people, they're just naturally not going to be, thinking about it. Is that kind of what you were thinking in that sense? What else? How else do we?
I was thinking, when you teach us, like, my wife doesn't like to read, but the information I get from all of this, I relay to her. And it's like, wow, I never thought about that and all this. I guess that's probably communication.
Well, no, I think that's different. I think you're talking more education than communication. Yeah, and education is key. Educating in a normal church, a church like ours, where should that education? What are the venues for that education? Preaching.
By our ministers, or the little Bible
Sunday schools.
Tyrannus,
Yeah, and in all of those venues, that if the Great Commission is the Great Commission, then at some manner it needs to continually be put before us. And that's can be particularly difficult in a church like ours, because the Great Commission is listed by nature 4 times in the Bible. I haven't figured it out. I've been preaching here for 22 years. If I was actually going to get through all of the Bible, it would be 40, at least another 22, because we'll make the New Testament easy, but there's just a lot of stuff. We're not doing Jeremiah, or Deuteronomy. I mean, but if we did, my point being, in 44 years, we would come across the Great Commission 4 times. That's hardly appropriate for the magnitude of the passage. So to constantly keep those things in front of us is
and that's where the other avenues of your church goes into. I keep hearing all this from this class, the preaching on Sundays, men's Bible study. So I do get the message frequently.
What age start teaching about missions? From the beginning, right? Reason not to teach kids. We do a missions conference. A lot of churches don't do those anymore because it takes time and energy. I think that's an important aspect of keeping it in front of us.
But see, that's why, coming back to Pentecost, because when each person feels the burden, not the pressure being imposed on them,
Yeah.
the inward burden, which all is foundational in love.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah,
love isn't
right.
there, but that is what then spills out then to missions. It begins here, but that burden is then how it's carried. I think carried is why.
Yeah, and so are you? Are you saying then that our emphasis should be on the burden, or how it spills out?
Your neighbor.
On loving your neighbor.
As you love your neighbor, that's that burden for them. Then you start to see, it's farther out neighbors, and that's where the mission comes.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not, really concerned with loving our neighbor, is
it
mission
a burden
going
or
to come?
just an
Yeah.
inspiration and motivation? That's what I kind of think of: inspiration and motivation, not a burden.
Well, I think you're using the term burden in meaning something I'm not something that my soul longs for.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I feel the
A love,
Yeah.
it's just a love for people.
like a burden for somebody who's sick. A love for.
Some things I understand the missions week. I didn't hear Dr. Bethel's first message the person who's in the back in that area, in the kitchen area. But just to have my eyes open to, and obviously he stayed with us, but just the amount of persecutions other Christians face as normal.
Yeah.
And how we don't have that really here at all.
Yeah.
And then just hearing things, even like when I don't know what his name is, it's about Thailand.
Juxtaposition.
All that is just I've not been overseas. I've been to Mexico and Canada, but not over into those kind of countries. And so just really is good for me to have my eyes and my compassion open for like the needs are so great over there.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the persecution, like I don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. What was I going to say? I can't remember. But good. Those are all. All. I think. I don't know that there's a silver bullet, Steve. I don't know that even love your neighbor is a silver bullet. It's a fundamental thing that we got to keep going back to that too. The second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. The first greatest. We could say the real silver bullet is the first commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, might, and strength. You know, but so I think it's, I think that if we're going to keep missions in front of us, then we've got to keep missions in front of us. We want to keep evangelism in front of us. We've got to think about how to do that. Again, a lot of these spiritual disciplines or key spiritual issues that, in a sense, the Holy Spirit is gonna prompt us, but nonetheless, we just know we need to keep teaching. A couple of other things that I would say, if
Actually, I want to add to the
okay,
list.
add to the list.
Sorry.
No, fine.